Chapter 17 of The Sign of the Cross in the 19th Century. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Sign of the Cross in the 19th Century by GAUME. 17th Letter. Summary. Nature of the Sign of the Cross. How it is valued at the present day. What the contempt and forgetfulness of the Sign of the Cross announce. Spectacle of the present world. Satan returns. To remain faithful to the Sign of the Cross, principally before and after meals. Reason, honor, and liberty commands it. Is reason for or against those who make the Sign of the Cross over food? Examples and arguments. December 12th. A universal weapon, an invincible weapon for man, lightning conductor for creatures, souvenir of man's deliverance, and trophy of victory for the word Redeemer. Such, my dear Frederick, was the Sign of the Cross in the eyes of the first Christians. Thence came the use they made of it, the sentiments with which it inspired them, and the magnificent spectacle we have just witnessed. Have we retained the faith of our forefathers? What is the Sign of the Cross to the Christians of the 19th century? What use do they make of it, either for themselves or for creatures? Are the sentiments of faith, confidence, respect, gratitude, and love which it awakens in them lively or even real? And among those who do make it, do not the greater part make it without knowing what they are doing, without attaching to it either any great value or any considerable importance? How many are there who no longer make it? How many who are ashamed to do so? How many, even, who do not like to see it made? They have removed it from the tops of their houses, banished it out of their apartments, and effaced it from their furniture. They have caused it to disappear from the public places and walks of their cities, from the gardens and parks of their villas, from the roads of their villages, from the greater part of the places in which our forefathers erected it. They have broken the crosses. What means this? What do such symptoms announce? Do you wish to know? Reascend to that principle which throws light on all history. Two contrary spirits dispute between them the empire of the world, the spirit of good and the spirit of evil. All that is done is by divine inspiration or by satanical inspiration. The institution of the Sign of the Cross, the incessant use of the Sign of the Cross, the confidence in the Sign of the Cross, the omnipotent virtue attributed to the Sign of the Cross, are they the result of a divine or a satanic inspiration? It must be either one or the other. If of satanic inspiration, then the elite of humanity, who alone make the Sign of the Cross, have for more than 18 centuries been struck with incurable blindness, while all those who do not belong to the elite of humanity have been in full possession of the light. This would be to say that the nearsighted, those blind of an eye or totally blind, see more clearly than those who have two good eyes. Do you think there is a pride so desperate as to advance such a paradox, an incredulity so strong as to sustain it? But if it is by divine inspiration that the sign of the cross is practiced, repeated, cherished, and regarded as the invincible, universal, permanent, and necessary weapon of mankind, what shall we think of a world that no longer understands the sign of the cross, that no longer makes it, that despises it, is ashamed of it, no longer salutes it, wishes it no longer in its sight, or under the face of its Son? Unless human nature is radically changed, and dualism but a chimera, unless Satan has withdrawn from the combat, unless creatures have ceased to be the medium of his fatal influence, the Christian of today, the despiser of the sign of the cross, is but an unworthy scion of a noble race. The 19th century is a foolish rationalist, who understands neither the combat nor the conditions of the combat; a presumptuous soldier, who, after having broken his weapon and thrown aside his armor, casts himself blindly, with his arms bound and his breast bared, into the midst of swords and lances. Modern society is a dismantled city, surrounded by innumerable enemies, impatient to reduce it to ruins, and put the garrison to the sword. To reduce it to ruins? But is it not already a ruin? A ruin of belief, ruin of morals, ruin of authority, ruin of tradition, ruin of the fear of God and of conscience, ruin of virtue, probity, mortification, obedience, the spirit of sacrifice, resignation, and hope. On all sides, ruin either commenced or consummated. In public and in private life, in city and in country, in him who governs and those who are governed, in the order of ideas and the dominion of facts, how many men or things remain truly and sincerely Catholic? In this, dear Frederick, there is nothing that ought to astonish us. Take away the sign of the cross, and all shall be explained. The less of the sign of the cross in the world, the more of Satan. The sign of the cross is the lightning rod of the world. Remove it, and the thunderbolt falls, which shall burn and crush you. The sign of the cross is a trophy which attests the dominion of the victor. To break it is to give joy to the ancient enemy of mankind, and prepare the way for his return. Listen to what was written 17 centuries ago by one of those men who best understood the mysterious power of the sign of the cross. I mean that martyr, illustrious among all others, Saint Ignatius of Antioch. Contemplate that white-haired bishop, loaded with chains, traveling 400 leagues to be devoured by lions under the eyes of the great city of Rome. See him, as calm as if standing at the altar, as joyful as if going to a feast, sowing on his way instruction and encouragement to the churches of Asia, which hasten to meet him in his passage. In his admirable letter to the Christians of Philippi, he says, "The prince of this world rejoices when he sees any one abandon the cross. He knows it is the cross that brings death to him, for it is the weapon destructive to his power. The sight of it horrifies him, the name frightens him. Before it was made, he neglected no means of having it constructed, and to this work he incited the children of unbelief, Judas, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the old, the young, and the priests. But when he saw it on the point of being completed, he was troubled. He excited remorse in the soul of the traitor, presented him with the rope, and tempted him to hang himself. He troubled Pilate's wife by a painful dream, and made every effort to prevent the construction of the cross. Not because he had remorse. If he had felt it, he would not have been wholly bad. But he had a presentiment of his defeat. He was not deceived. The cross is the principle of his condemnation, the principle of his death, the principle of his ruin. Thence come two teachings: horror and fear of the demon at the sight of the cross and the sign of the cross, and his joy at the absence of both one and the other. If he sees a soul or a country without the sign of the cross, he enters it fearlessly, and remains there at his ease. As inevitably as darkness succeeds light after the setting of the sun, so inevitably does he there reestablish his empire. The present world is a sensible proof of it. I do not speak of that deluge of denials, impieties, and unheard of blasphemies with which it is inundated. What are, for those who are not satisfied with words, those millions of table turnings, those spirit rappings or familiar spirits, those apparitions, incantations, oracles, medical consultations, and pretended conversations with the dead, which have so suddenly invaded the old and new world? Footnote: at the time in which we are writing, there is an unparalleled recrudescence of occult practices. In Paris, spiritualism has formed numerous associations which have their regular meetings. Besides many books, they have 3 special papers to serve as their periodical organs. Metz and Bordeaux, you may be sure, contain many thousand spiritualists. In Lyons there are at least 15,000, with a journal, in which they pretend that the religion of spirit rapping is to be the religion of the future. What does all this mean? Simply that after 18 centuries of Christianity, there are in France thousands of idolaters, who either ignorantly or designedly do what was done 2,000 years ago at Delphi, at Dodona, at Sinope, and all the cities of pagan antiquity. Things have arrived to such a state that many bishops have been obliged to warn the clergy and faithful of their dioceses against this usurpation of Satan. End footnote. Are these things new? No, mankind has already seen them. At what epoch? When the sign of the cross did not protect mankind, and Satan was the king, the god of society. By reappearing today in a degree unknown since ancient paganism, what do they signify, if not that the sign of the cross ceasing now to protect the world, Satan is retaking possession of it? You see, dear friend, how little intelligence have those who abandon the sign of the cross. Let us pity, but not imitate them. There is one circumstance in particular in which we must invariably separate ourselves from them. With us, as with our forefathers, the sign of the cross before and after meals must be a sacred duty. Reason, honor, and liberty demand it. Reason. If you ask your companions why they do not make the sign of the cross before taking food, each will answer, I do not wish to make myself singular by doing differently from others. I do not wish to be remarked and laughed at for observing a useless and obsolete practice. They do not wish to make themselves singular. For the sake of their honor, I will believe that they do not understand the import of those words. To be singular is to put one's self in the singular number, to isolate one's self, and to act differently from everybody else. In this sense, we may very well be singular without being ridiculous. One is sometimes obliged to be so under pain of being guilty. A reasonable man, who, in a madhouse, performs sensible actions, an honest man, who, in a land of thieves, respects the property of others, are both singular. Are they ridiculous? To be singular, in the sense in which your companions understand it, is to differ ridiculously from established usages. It remains to be seen whether, by making the sign of the cross before and after meals, we make ourselves singular, and this in a ridiculous manner. Without doubt, answer they, since you act differently from others. But there are others and others. There are others who make the sign of the cross, and others who do not make it. Therefore, by making it, we are no more singular than by not making it. We remain perfectly in the plural. Are we ridiculous? To answer this, it suffices to see who are the others who make, and the others who do not make, the sign of the cross. The others who make it are you and I, your respected family and mine. And we are not alone. Behind us, around us, beside us, are the true, learned, and courageous Catholics who have lived in the East and West during 18 centuries. Now, as we have seen, those Catholics, neither more nor less, have formed the elite of mankind. We are so far from being ridiculous by remaining in such company, that we become perfectly so by separating ourselves from them. Except for those who are satisfied with words, and who would wish to satisfy others with the same, this proposition is indisputable. Nothing is more fully established than that the elite of mankind have always made the sign of the cross before meals. The fathers whom I have quoted, Tertullian, St. Cyril, St. Ephrem, and St. John Chrysostom, leave us no doubt as to the universality of this religious practice among the Christians of the primitive church. To these I will add a few others. When, says St. Athanasius, we sit down to table, and take the bread to break it, we make the sign of the cross over it 3 times, and return thanks. After the repast, we renew our thanksgiving by saying thrice, The good and merciful Lord has given food to those that fear him. Glory be to the Father, etc. And St. Jerome, Let no one ever sit at table without having prayed, and let him never leave it without having given thanks to the Creator. St. Chrysostom brands as they deserve those who dispense themselves from this sacred law of wisdom and gratitude. We must pray before and after meals. Hear this, ye swine, who nourish yourselves with the gifts of God, without raising your eyes to the hand that gives them. The blessing of the table by the sign of the cross was in use not only in families and in private life. The soldiers in their camps observed it with religious fidelity. On this point Saint Gregory Nazianzen relates a fact which is still famous. Julian the Apostate was rewarding his troops by an extraordinary distribution of money and provisions. Near the emperor was placed a lighted perfume pan, into which each soldier cast a few grains of incense. The Christian soldiers did like the others, never suspecting that by it they rendered themselves guilty of an act of idolatry. The distribution being over, the soldiers reassembled for the feast of the prince. At the beginning of the banquet, the cup was presented to a Christian soldier, who, according to custom, blessed it by the sign of the cross. Suddenly a voice was heard, saying, "What you are now doing is in contradiction to what you have just done." "What have I done?" "Have you, then, forgotten the incense and the perfume pan? Do you not know that you have performed an act of idolatry and denied your faith?" At these words he and his brave companions in arms arose from the table, and, sighing, groaning, and tearing their hair, they rushed out, declaring aloud that they were Christians, accusing the emperor of having deceived them, and demanding another trial, that they might confess their faith. The apostate ordered them to be arrested, bound, condemned, and led to the place of execution. But not wishing to make them martyrs, he commuted the sentence of death into that of exile to the farthest parts of the empire. Whenever a priest was among the guests, on him was conferred the honor of making the sign of the cross over the food. The blessing at table was regarded as so holy a practice that in the 9th century we find the Bulgarians converted to the faith asking Pope Nicholas I if a layman might take the place of a priest in performing this function. "Without doubt," answered the Pope, "for it has been given to each one to preserve by the sign of the cross all that belongs to him from the snares of the demon, and in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ to triumph over his attacks." Succeeding ages have seen the use of the sign of the cross before and after meals among the true Catholics of the East and West. You know that it still exists. We know the others that make the sign of the cross before meals. Let us see who are the others that do not make it, and to whom your young companions give the preference. Pagans do not make it. Jews do not make it. Heretics do not make it. Atheists do not make it. Bad Catholics do not make it. Ignorant Catholics, or those enslaved by human respect, do not make it. Behold those others who do not make the sign of the cross, and who laugh at those who do. On which side is the ridiculous singularity? In my next letter I shall follow up this objection. End of 17th letter.